Daniel didn't call before he came over. That, more than anything, told me this wasn't a courtesy visit. I was in the living room, pretending to read one of my mother's old books, when the knock came, firm, measured, familiar. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tensed. My breath caught. Some part of me had been waiting for that sound. I opened the door and there he was. Older, yes. Lines at the corners of his mouth, a touch of gray at his temples. But the same steady presence, the same careful eyes that had once watched me like I was a puzzle he was afraid to solve incorrectly. "Claire," he said. "Daniel." For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt charged, dense with everything we hadn't said when we'd ended our marriage. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said finally. I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Hello to you too." He winced. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I said. And I did. He had always been bad at soft openings. I stepped aside, and he came in, his gaze sweeping the room like he was cataloging potential hazards. The house unsettled him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "It hasn't changed," he said. "No," I replied. "Neither have the secrets." His eyes flicked to me. "You found the letters." It wasn't a question. My stomach dropped. "You knew about them?" "I knew you wrote them," he said carefully. "I didn't know if you'd find them this soon." I folded my arms, anger flaring. "You let me come back here without telling me?" "You told me not to," he said quietly. The room seemed to tilt. "I told you to let me forget," I whispered. "Yes." "And you agreed?" He hesitated just long enough to damn himself. "I agreed to try." I looked away, suddenly overwhelmed by the intimacy of his knowledge. He knew me in ways I clearly no longer knew myself. "Why didn't you stop me?" I asked. Daniel's voice softened. "Because you were certain it was the only way you could live with what you'd done." The words landed hard. "What did I do?" I demanded. He stepped closer, then stopped, as though crossing some invisible boundary would be a mistake. "You didn't kill anyone," he said. Relief washed over me so fast it made me dizzy. "But," he continued, "you helped make sure the truth never came out." My relief curdled into something darker. "About what?" Daniel looked toward the staircase, his eyes lingering on the hallway above. "About what happened in that house," he said. "And who you were protecting." After Daniel left, I couldn't sit still. The house felt smaller now, its walls inching closer, its silence heavy with implication. I paced from room to room, my thoughts spiraling, until instinct carried me to my old bedroom. The desk by the window waited patiently, its surface bare except for the faint dent I'd noticed before. I pulled the chair out and sat. For a moment, nothing happened. No revelation. No rush of memory. Then I opened the drawer. Inside were notebooks. Dozens of them, stacked neatly, their spines unmarked. My breath hitched. I pulled one free and flipped it open. Dates. Timelines. Names. The handwriting was mine, but tighter than I remembered, more controlled. The language was clinical, investigative. This wasn't journaling. This was reporting. I skimmed pages, my pulse quickening. Witness statements inconsistent. Timeline altered after police interview. Mother's account contradicts physical evidence. I froze. My mother's account. I flipped faster now, pages blurring together. Diagrams of the house. The hallway. The staircase. The closed door on the right. A list titled Possible Motives. Names I recognized from the neighborhood. From my childhood. And then, further back, a section labeled Why Claire Bennett Cannot Be Trusted as the Narrator. My hands trembled. I read the bullet points beneath it, each one a precise incision. Highly intelligent. Skilled at narrative control. Prone to compartmentalization under stress. Demonstrated ability to self-gaslight when necessary. If memory loss occurs, assume intentional suppression. I leaned back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't the work of someone unraveling. This was the work of someone planning. I closed the notebook and stared out the window, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. I looked like a stranger. Or worse, a collaborator. The journalist I used to be hadn't been investigating a stranger's crime. She had been investigating herself. And somewhere along the way, she decided the truth was too dangerous to survive intact. I heard a soft sound behind me. The whisper of paper sliding across wood. I turned. Another envelope sat on the desk. My handwriting. This one bore a single line on the front. This is where you stopped reading last time. I didn't touch the envelope for a long time. It sat on the desk like a verdict, its single line daring me to deny it. This is where you stopped reading last time. The implication was clear, this wasn't discovery. It was recurrence. I closed the bedroom door before opening it, as though privacy might still matter between versions of myself. The letter inside was longer than the first. Several pages, folded carefully. The paper smelled faintly of dust and something older, ink that had had time to settle into itself. You're probably angry right now, it began. That's normal. You always get angry before you get curious. I swallowed. If you found this letter, then Daniel has already tried to soften the truth. Ethan too, if you ran into him early enough. You'll think they're conspiring against you. They're not. They're following instructions. My chest tightened. You made them promise not to tell you outright. You said remembering too fast would break the narrative you need to survive. I flipped the page, my hands cold. Here's what you won't want to hear, no one is gaslighting you. Not anymore. What you're experiencing is a controlled collapse. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course it is. The letter continued, relentless in its precision. You know how memory works. You've written about it. It isn't a recording, it's a story, revised every time it's told. You decided to interrupt that process. To freeze certain events before they could finish forming. Images flickered at the edges of my mind. A staircase. Raised voices. The smell of something sharp and chemical. I pressed my fingers to my temple, but the letter didn't stop. You were right to be afraid of the truth. You were wrong to think you could outrun it forever. The final paragraph was written more heavily, the pen pressed hard enough to nearly tear the page. Go upstairs. Open the door. If you're reading this again, it means you finally understand that the danger was never forgetting. It was remembering alone. I folded the letter slowly, deliberately. My breathing was shallow, my body braced as if for impact. This letter didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a handoff. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back against the bed, the letter resting on my knees, and tried to think like a journalist instead of a subject. Facts first. I had written the letters. Multiple people confirmed it. The handwriting matched. The knowledge contained within them exceeded anything an outsider could fabricate. I had planned this. The question wasn't whether I was being manipulated. The question was by which version of myself. I thought about gaslighting, the deliberate erosion of someone's trust in their own perception. I'd exposed it in corporations, in relationships, in institutions that relied on plausible deniability and power imbalance. But this was surgical. Methodical. Designed with intimate knowledge of my thresholds and patterns. Only I could have done this to me. The realization didn't bring comfort. It brought dread. Because it meant the version of me who had set this in motion believed, absolutely, that I could not be trusted with the full truth. I stood and paced the room, my steps uneven. Every surface felt suddenly suspect. The notebooks. The desk. The walls themselves. How many contingencies had I built into this house? How many reminders had I left behind? I stopped in front of the mirror again. "You did this," I said to my reflection. She stared back, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, mouth set in a line that spoke of stubborn resolve. "Yes," she seemed to reply. "Because you had to." A sharp knock echoed from somewhere deep in the house. I froze. It wasn't the front door. It came from above. From the hallway. From the closed door on the right. My pulse roared in my ears as I stepped into the hall. The air felt denser here, charged with something unsaid. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring up at the landing. Another sound. Softer this time. A shift. Like something settling. "There's no one there," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. At the top, I stood before the door I'd avoided since returning. The door my mother had kept closed. The door the letters wanted me to open. I raised my hand, hesitated. Then stopped. Because carved into the wood, just beneath the handle, was a shallow marking I hadn't noticed before. 3 small lines. Not random. Measurements. Claire, 8. Claire, 11. Claire, 15. And beneath them, faint but unmistakable. Claire. I stepped back, my breath coming fast. Whatever I had done in this house hadn't ended. It had paused. And now, the version of me who remembered was knocking from the other side. The door wasn't locked. That was the first surprise. My hand closed around the knob, and it turned easily, almost welcomingly, as though it had never been sealed at all, only avoided. The resistance I'd expected, the symbolic finality of a lock, was absent. I pushed the door open. The room smelled wrong. Not rotten. Not stale. Preserved. Like paper kept too long in a closed box. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by a narrow beam of light from the small window opposite the door. This wasn't a bedroom. There was no bed. No dresser. It was a study. A second desk, larger than the one in my room, sat beneath the window. Filing boxes lined the walls, labeled in my handwriting. Shelves sagged under the weight of binders, folders, manila envelopes. This wasn't my mother's secret. It was mine. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet, and closed the door behind me. The sound felt deliberate. Final. The desk was meticulously arranged. Pens aligned. Paper stacked. A recorder sat near the edge, its red light dark, inactive. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. A post-it note clung to the back. "Don't listen until you've read everything else." I set it down carefully. On the desk lay a single folder, placed dead center. Unlike the others, it wasn't labeled. Its tab was blank. My heart hammered as I opened it. Photographs spilled out. The hallway. The staircase. The front door. And then, a body. The image was grainy, poorly lit, taken in haste. A teenage boy lay crumpled at the base of the stairs, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles, his face turned away from the camera. I dropped the photo as if it burned. My vision tunneled, the room tilting violently. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The name surfaced without warning. Mark Ellis. 17. Loud laugh. Reckless smile. Always pushing boundaries like the rules were a personal challenge. He'd lived 2 houses down. I remembered the police cars. The flashing lights. I remembered the story everyone told. Accident. Drugs. Drinking. A fall down the stairs at a party gone wrong. I sank into the desk chair, my legs no longer able to hold me. The photographs said otherwise. I forced myself to keep looking. More images. Close-ups of the banister. A broken spindle. A dark smear on the wall, blood, unmistakably blood. Then documents. Copies of police reports with annotations in the margins. Timeline doesn't match lividity. Injuries inconsistent with fall alone. Witnesses coached. Or rehearsed. I flipped to the final page. A single sentence, written in my hand, underlined twice. Claire Bennett pushed him. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. As if even the house were holding its breath. The memory hit me then. Not as a scene. As a feeling. Fear. White hot and immediate. Mark shouting. The smell of alcohol. My back against the railing. My mother's voice somewhere behind me, sharp with panic. And my hands. Outstretched. I stood abruptly, knocking the chair backward. "I didn't mean to," I said aloud, the words tumbling out. I didn't. But intent didn't matter. The truth was already waiting for me in ink and paper and bone-deep certainty. I had pushed him. And then. I had made sure no one ever knew. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't call Daniel. I called everyone. That's how I knew I was spiraling. By late afternoon, Ethan, Daniel, and 2 others from my childhood, Lena and Paul, were sitting in my living room, spaced too evenly apart, like witnesses waiting to be interviewed. No one spoke at first. The folder lay on the coffee table between us. Open. "You knew," I said finally. It wasn't accusatory. It was exhausted. Lena nodded, tears already streaking down her face. We all did. Ethan stared at the floor. Paul rubbed his hands together compulsively. "We were kids," he said. "We didn't know what to do." "You knew enough," I replied. "Enough to lie." Daniel leaned forward. "Claire, you didn't push him the way you're thinking." I snapped my gaze to him. I shoved him. "You were defending yourself," he said firmly. He was drunk. Aggressive. He cornered you. My head shook automatically. That doesn't change what happened. "No," Daniel said. "But it changes why." Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were red. "Your mother saw everything," he said. "She came in right after." My chest tightened. "And she?" "She took control," Lena said softly. She called it an accident before anyone else could. Paul swallowed. She told us what to say. What we'd seen. What we hadn't. I laughed then, a hollow sound. She always was good at that. Daniel's voice was gentle. You tried to tell the truth later. When you were older. That's when you started investigating. And when I realized I'd destroy everyone, I finished. Including myself. No one contradicted me. That's when I decided to forget, I said. Yes, Daniel replied. You called it an ethical compromise. I closed my eyes. Ethics. God, I'd always loved that word. Clean. Abstract. Safe. I made you promise, I said to the room. Ethan nodded. You made us swear you'd be allowed to live. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was complicit. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at Briarwood Lane as evening settled in. The street looked peaceful. Innocent. A lie we'd all agreed to maintain. I wrote the letters so I could come back, I said slowly. So I could remember without being alone. Daniel said nothing. I turned back to them. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. For the first time, no one pretended to have an answer. After they left, the house felt heavier. Not emptier, denser. As if the truth they'd spoken had soaked into the walls, making the air harder to breathe. I stood alone in the living room long after the door closed behind them, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock my mother had insisted on keeping even when it lost time. I carried the thin notebook, the one from my mother's nightstand, into the kitchen and sat at the table where she used to drink her tea. I read it again. Slowly. This time, the entries hurt more. Claire seems calmer today. No questions. She didn't go upstairs. Each line was a checkmark. A report. Not of love, but of containment. My mother hadn't just protected me from the world. She'd protected the world from me. And in doing so, she'd erased the worst thing I'd ever done and turned it into the only thing I'd never been allowed to confront. I flipped back further, searching for what wasn't there. No grief. No guilt. No hesitation. Only management. A memory surfaced then, uninvited. I was 15. Sitting at this same table. My hands shaking so badly I spilled tea across the wood. My mother standing over me, her face unreadable. This cannot ruin your life, she'd said. You are not a monster. Monsters don't feel regret. I had believed her. But regret wasn't absolution. I pressed my palms flat against the table, feeling the grooves worn into it by decades of use. You should have let me remember, I whispered to the empty room. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I hadn't been ready then. The silence she'd enforced hadn't been kindness, but it hadn't been cruelty either. It had been fear. Calculated. Controlled. Inherited. I stood and walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the banister, the doorframes. Seeing it now for what it was, not a home, but a holding structure. A place where truth had been stabilized until it could be born. By me. I stopped in the hallway upstairs and looked at the growth marks carved into the wall. Claire, 8. Claire, 11. Claire, 15. Claire. My mother had known I'd come back. The question mark wasn't uncertainty. It was patience. I returned to the upstairs study with purpose. The room no longer felt forbidden. It felt functional. Like a lab I'd built for a version of myself I was finally catching up to. I opened boxes methodically, cataloging their contents the way I once had on deadline. Each binder was labeled with dates, cross-referenced with police reports, witness statements, medical examiner findings. Not to exonerate me. To understand me. There were transcripts of recorded conversations, with consent forms attached. Interviews with neighbors, classmates, even teachers. Everyone who'd been nearby that night. I had been thorough. Obsessive. And careful to never cross the line from investigator to suspect in public. I found a manila envelope labeled failsafe. Inside were instructions. If memory loss exceeds X years, begin with letters. If emotional destabilization occurs, pause retrieval. If denial persists, reintroduce photographic evidence gradually. My stomach twisted. I'd turned myself into a case study. At the bottom of the envelope lay a USB drive and a handwritten note. If you're holding this, you already know the truth. This is for when knowing isn't enough. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The first file was an audio recording. I pressed play. My own voice filled the room, calm, precise, terrifyingly composed. Claire, it said. If you're listening to this, then the forgetting worked. Temporarily. Good. That means you lived. I swallowed hard. You're going to want to assign blame, my voice continued. To Mother. To Daniel. To the house. Resist that. You made the choice because you understood the alternative. The recording paused briefly, then resumed. You are not innocent. But you are not irredeemable. The difference matters. Tears streamed down my face, silent and relentless. You couldn't tell the truth then without destroying multiple lives, including your own. But that doesn't mean you get to keep it forever. The file ended. I sat in the quiet aftermath, shaking. This had never been about escape. It had been about timing. And now the clock had finally run out. I returned to the staircase at dusk. Not because I wanted to, but because the house demanded it. The light through the front window fell at an angle that cast long shadows across the steps, stretching them into something unfamiliar. I stood at the top, looking down, trying to reconcile the geometry with the damage. 17 steps. I counted them twice. Mark had fallen from the fourth. Not the top. Not enough height to kill him by accident. The medical report had been clear, once you knew how to read it. Blunt force trauma inconsistent with a simple tumble. A head striking the edge of the banister at just the wrong angle. I crouched and examined the repaired spindle. Newer wood. Slightly off color. My mother had fixed it. Of course she had. The memory sharpened now, assembling itself with brutal clarity. Mark's breath hot and sour with alcohol. His hand on my wrist, too tight. His laughter when I told him to stop. The way he blocked the hallway, crowding me backward. My mother shouting his name. The shove hadn't been planned. It had been instinct. He'd stumbled, surprised, reaching for balance that wasn't there. The banister giving way. The sound his body made as it hit. I remembered screaming then. Falling to my knees beside him. Blood pooling too fast, too dark. I hadn't meant to kill him. But I had. I sank onto the step where I'd knelt that night and pressed my forehead to the railing. Intent didn't undo consequence. But neither did consequence erase context. The crime lived here because it had never been named honestly. It had been buried under euphemism and protection and the comforting lie of accident. I stood slowly, my legs trembling. For the first time, I didn't try to soften the truth. I said it out loud. I killed Mark Ellis. The house did not collapse. The world did not end. What broke instead was the last remaining illusion, that silence had been mercy. That night, I dreamed without distortion. No metaphors. No symbolism. Just memory. I sat at the upstairs desk, years ago, the room newly converted into a study. My mother downstairs, Daniel asleep in our bed. The house quiet enough to hear my own breathing. I was writing the first letter. My hands were steady. I watched myself, calm, focused, decisive. This version of me didn't flinch from the truth. She respected it too much to pretend it could be undone. You don't get to disappear, she said aloud, testing the words. But you do get to survive. She wrote until dawn. Instructions. Safeguards. A plan that relied on one thing above all else. Trust. Trust that I would come back. Trust that I would be strong enough when I did. I woke with my heart racing, the boundary between then and now thinner than ever. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I see you, I said. Not accusing. Not forgiving. Acknowledging. The version of me I'd erased hadn't been weak or cowardly. She had been pragmatic. She had understood that memory without agency was cruelty, and that truth demanded preparation. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was grateful. Because she hadn't destroyed me. She had delayed me. And now, standing in the aftermath of remembrance, I knew there was one decision left to make. Not about guilt, but about responsibility. I used to believe betrayal was an act you committed against someone else. A violation. A fracture of trust. Now I understood it could also be an act of preservation. I had betrayed myself deliberately, had severed memory from identity and locked it away because the alternative had been annihilation. The version of me who made that choice had not been running from consequence. She had been calculating the cost of endurance. I walked through the house slowly, not searching this time, not avoiding. Just inhabiting it fully, as I had not done in years. The walls felt quieter now. Less watchful. As though the house itself had been waiting for me to stop lying. The letters. The study. The careful pacing of remembrance. None of it had been designed to absolve me. It had been designed to make sure I survived long enough to choose what came next. That was the betrayal. I had denied myself the truth until I could bear it. And now I could. The last letter waited in the study, sealed in a plain envelope, tucked into the drawer beneath the recorder. I recognized the handwriting immediately, not rushed, not tight. Resolved. I opened it without hesitation. If you're reading this, then you already know what you did. This letter is not here to explain it. I exhaled slowly. This is about what comes after. The words were steady. Me at my clearest. You are not required to destroy yourself to honor the dead. But you are required to stop hiding. I felt the truth of that sentence settle into my chest like a weight finding its proper place. You couldn't tell the truth then because it would have broken you before it helped anyone. That is no longer true. I closed my eyes. There is no version of justice that asks you to disappear. There is only accountability, and the courage to live with it. The final line was underlined once. Leave the house when you've decided who you are going to be. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer. For the first time, there were no more instructions. I didn't call the police. Not immediately. Instead, I sat at the desk and began to write. Not letters this time, not contingencies. A statement. Clear. Precise. Honest. I documented the night Mark Ellis died. The confrontation. The shove. The fall. My mother's intervention. The silence that followed. I didn't editorialize. I didn't defend myself. I told the truth the way I once demanded it from others. When I finished, I sent copies to my attorney, to a journalist I trusted, and to the family who had lived for years with a lie dressed up as closure. Then I waited. I didn't feel redeemed. I felt present. Whatever happened next would happen to the whole of me, not a fragmented version hiding behind amnesia. That was the difference. I left Briarwood Lane at dawn. The house stood quietly as I loaded my car, no longer looming, no longer calling. Just a structure of wood and memory, emptied of its secrets. Before I drove away, I went inside one last time. I stood in the hallway and looked at the growth marks on the wall. Claire, 8. Claire, 11. Claire, 15. Claire. I took a pen from my pocket and added one final line beneath the question mark. Claire, now. Then I set the pen down and walked out. The house didn't follow. Some truths don't free you. They anchor you. And for the first time in my life, I was anchored, to memory, to responsibility, to myself. I drove away knowing exactly who I was. Not innocent. Not erased. But whole. You've been listening to The House on Briarwood Lane. A story about memory, responsibility, and the quiet weight of truth. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel unsettled in the best way, let me know by liking this video and commenting with your interpretation or favorite moment. And if you'd like more psychological thrillers, dark fiction, and immersive readings, subscribe to Briarwood Reads so you don't miss what comes next. Until our next story. Remember, some houses let you leave, but they never let you forget.